Good morning, everybody. PatBenage here, the evolution coach, creator of the 6-week shift, the inner path, and author of this inspirational blog, SoulTalk. And here today, I want to continue on this journey that I've been exploring over the last few weeks, talking about where we've come from, how we've sort of gotten to this place, and in the last couple of weeks talked about truth, in that it's all one truth. It's all the same truth. And today I want to talk about why is it that we don't simply just see the truth of things. What gets in our way? What is it that keeps me from being in that place where I see the truth of things, that I see the struggles that somebody's going through, that influences how they're acting, how they're behaving in a particular moment? How is it that I can't see it in myself even at times? That there's this underlying thing that hides the real truth from us. And what is that? What is that? How come we can't see through that? What keeps us from noticing absolute truth? And I know it's a lot of questions I've thrown out all at once, but they're all around this same thing. And so I want to talk today about what is it that's in our way? What is it that what's the source of this illusion and delusion that we experience? And I've alluded to this at various times over, well, since I've been doing this Soul Talk, but over the last few weeks, that the mind and ego, the soul comes into this existence, this experience, by adding layers and layers and filters to allow it to experience and to see itself as a separate identity, to see other parts of the one as separate from it, in order to understand and to experience the differences that all of the aspects of itself and how they differ and how they relate to each other. And so the relationship of things, in order to experience that, one has to experience itself as the individual parts. And so we go through this evolutionary process in order to experience ourselves as the individual parts of the whole. And the purpose of that is to know oneself, the whole of oneself, all of the ins and outs of who I am. And I can only do that, to only experience that through all of these different relationships and all of the separate aspects of myself. So I experience as soul lifetimes and eons of different aspects, being and identifying myself as all of these individual aspects. And in that process over just vast numbers of lifetimes and experiences in these individual aspects, soul gets lost. Soul gets lost in that experience. And so we, as this individual entity, each of us begins to identify with the experience. We identify ourselves as that experience. So I identify myself when I get to this human experience as a human. You know, I come into life as a human being. And so that's how I see myself. I see myself as a human. I no longer identify myself as soul, having a human experience. I identify myself as a human being human, and living life as a human. And all of the experiences, all of the human experiences that I have then become important to me. And I become, because they are important, I become attached to them. And I become attached to specific experiences, specific things that I like about my life. These are desires. I have desires that I want my life to be, and in each individual life, those desires change. And the experiences change, but in this particular one, so each one we're identifying with the specific life that we're living at this time. So I identify right now as PatBenage. I identify as with all the experiences that PatBenage has had throughout my nearly 58 years. And some of them I like and some of them I don't like. And so I decide over time what I like, what I don't like, what experiences I want to have more of and what I want to get rid of. And this I talked about last couple of times, about resistance. So I become resistant to that which I don't like, that I don't want. And a different sort of resistance, I become attached to what I do like, what I do want. And in that process, I limit my experience. I limit what my experience is of my whole self, because I'm only seeing it through this one perspective. I'm only seeing it through the identity of PatBenage. And even that, I'm seeing it through the identity of PatBenage in this particular moment, and how I feel, what my emotions are, what my thoughts are, what stresses are happening in my life at the moment. All of this stuff, it clouds my judgment. It limits my perspective, so that now I'm seeing through multiple layers of crap. You know, and some of it I would call good and some of it I'd call bad. And it's all really the karma that I'm creating, the effect of whatever cause I've set into motion. So karma is simply cause and effect, and that's what life is about. It's creating through our thoughts, words, deeds, actions, creating through that an effect, because that's the cause. So we're causing some effect, and we're living out of that effect by identifying with the individual aspect. By identifying myself as a human being, I experience the human experience, and I am affected by that, because that's my view of life in this particular moment. So I'm identifying, when I identify as PatBenage, then I identify with all of the experiences that PatBenage is having. And I start labeling those experiences. And through those labels, I limit my perspective. I limit my view of life. And by doing so, by placing those limits on my life, I cannot see the whole picture. I lose sight of what is true. And over time, in this one lifetime, not even mentioning the multiple lifetimes that I've had, but even just in this one lifetime, over time, those judgments, those limitations that I've applied, I put limits on limits, and then limits on those limits, and then limits on those limits. So it's a continual narrowing of my point of view. It's a continual narrowing of my perspective on life, because I see things that remind me of something else, and I just file it away. I say, well, that's the same as this was back here, so I'm just throwing that out because I've had that experience already. I know what it's about. Don't need it anymore. Without ever actually looking at it. It's just an automatic. That's a subconscious mind that's saying, boom, boom, boom. That's something I've already had. And it's a total surface perspective. So what happens is, and I've talked about this before, I talked about the 5-dimensional perspective, the 5D perspective, and I've talked about the 1-dimensional, 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional. So the more limited, the more we narrow that perspective down, the more we bring ourselves from a 5D to a 4D to a 3D to a 2D to a 1D perspective. The 1D perspective is just looking at it, the face of it, and seeing one instant view, one instant impression, and saying that's what it is. And I've categorized it right off the bat. And so I don't give it another thought. I don't ever really look into it. I don't ever really say, is there more to this story? Because I think I already know. If I think I know, why do I need to explore? And the mind, as I've mentioned over and over again, the mind and ego, they like to be right. I like to be right. I like to know what it is and be right about it. And if I think I'm right, then that doesn't leave any room for the possibility of more. And so that's what happens. I get into this 1-dimensional or maybe 2-dimensional viewing of life. And when I encounter something new, then that holds interest for me. So I encounter something new, something that isn't something that the subconscious just automatically says, oh, well, that belongs in this category, so I'm just going to file it away without really looking at it. I get something that is at least a little bit outside of my previous experience in this life, and it catches my attention. And remember, the attention is where our power is. Attention is everything. Wherever I put my attention, that is where my energy goes. That's what I enhance. That's what I create. That's what I cause to grow and expand by giving it my attention, because that's my energy, that's my power. That's soul's energy that I'm using with my attention. I'm giving it, boom, my power. So now it draws that up. And so when something new arises, the mind gets distracted. The mind says, oh, that's new, so let me explore that. Let me look at that. And if it turns out that it seems to be like something else, then I'll just end up filing it away and I won't spend much time on it. But if it keeps, however long it keeps my interest, I keep looking at it, I keep exploring it, I keep going into it. And that can be anything. It could be anything. You know, I say sometimes to people that we get sort of distracted by the newest shiny object. You know, if you ever saw that animated feature Up, I highly recommend it. You know, it seems like it's a kid's movie, but it's got a great message in there. But one of the things is the animated dogs in this movie, you know, every time a squirrel comes around, they say, squirrel, squirrel, you know. But that's how we are. That's how ego is. That's how the mind is. It's attracted by the latest thing, the new shiny object. And if we look around into the world, we can see that manifest. You know, people, they have to get the latest car, the latest computer, the newest house. They're always looking to up it in some way. Not everybody, but it's pretty predominant in this, particularly in this country, but in Western culture, it's pretty predominant, and it seems to be spreading throughout the world more than it is not. And it's this culture of it's our human nature to want to explore new things. It's actually part of soul's nature to explore new things. It's just that the mind and the ego have corrupted that process. The mind and the ego have taken over that process. It's no longer soul that's exploring. It's soul's energy that the mind and ego and the emotions and the objects that we give our attention to have hijacked this soul energy to corrupt this process of evolution. And yet that's perfect. Because that's all part of the plan. Nothing is not part of the plan.